Okay. The first direction I will go, let's press on that one right there, because there could be an argument for, hey, this is an imperfect system that organizes everything that we do. But you could say the same thing for the Constitution. I would analogize the Constitution for a spine that is malfunctioning. You've got a bad back in a way. That doesn't mean that you're going to be better off if you rip out the spine. There's a lot of other things are going to fall apart. You're not going to have any organizing structure. You're going to have chaos. Why is it different for this? Why the total destruction of these mainstream properties that organize and make sense of what we're consuming? Why is the destruction of these things ultimately good and you're optimistic?
Number one, they're undemocratic, unlike the Constitution. Number two, they're actually insulated from business. They are not real business entities in the way that you and I are. You and I are actually much more products of a traditional supply and demand structure, as in people watch us and we succeed. CNN could lose 90% of its audience tomorrow, and it would still be in the black, roughly over 600 million. That is a fake business because the business is set up on cable carriage fees. That's where the vast majority of the profit comes from, for CNN, for Fox News, and for MSNBC. So I think that what that does is a terrible incentive where ideology is able to capture all three of these institutions, and they are totally insulated from their positions, on top of benefiting from archaic structures of the 1990s. So one of my favorite books, the ones that I always recommend, is called The Loudest Voice in the Room. It's a biography of Roger Ailes. Not only was Ailes like a singular and very important figure in American history, but you need to go and understand the physical process through which you attain cable. We're talking about literal slots, analog, like the amount of things that go into the box and the wires and how you get the monopoly. And they are literally just brand beneficiaries of the fact that the internet did not exist. And then they created the greatest business model of all time. You know, I don't begrudge the people who did that, but more so the institutions themselves, they just do not respond to supply and demand in a way that I think is really important for small d democratic institutions. So that's my argument, is that whatever comes next, it will be more reflective of democracy. It will be more reflective of eyeballs, of people's views. You may not like that. A lot of elites will not like that, but I will like it because I want it to be more representative. Yeah.
Yeah. I think I'm more agnostic. I'm actually pretty optimistic. I'm just doing the devil's advocate thing. And also, I can't predict the future. I don't want to get too optimistic. I remember in 2010, everybody was so optimistic about the Twitter disruptions and how it was going to create democracy all over the world. And we've largely forgotten about how Pollyanna-ish so much of the media commentary was. The Facebook and the Twitter impact on everything.
Well, I would argue that they were kind of right. It just turns out that democracy doesn't always look the way that we want it to. So, for example, you know, my parents are from India. India is a really interesting case. I mean, what I love about India and South America is they skipped the cable age. They went straight to YouTube. So when I tell people I'm a YouTuber in India, they're like, holy shit, that's a big deal. Like that's how people get the news. You know, they have TV news and all that, but, you know, villagers in India went literate. Literacy rates kind of coincided with 5G, and dudes in India are squatting on the street watching YouTube on their phone. That's how they consume information. In South America, Costa Rica, and elsewhere, same thing. If you tell people you're a news YouTuber, they think you're like Anderson Cooper because that's how they consume the news. So I think that they weren't wrong. You know, in India, basically the internet and the unshackling of traditional institutions allowed for the coalescing of nationalist politics, which the entire Indian elite tried to suppress for all of its history. And now you have a BJP majority. I mean, I could say the same thing in a lot of the Islamic world is like, yeah, it certainly led to expressing more opinion. It's just not the opinion that, you know, we may want to see, you know?
Yeah. That's always I'm reminded in sports and sports media that they're really big on players expressing themselves and speaking out about politics until they start getting some modal male athlete opinions, especially on gender and sexuality. And it's
Right.
whoa,
They're like, whoa.
We
Like,
mean
wait,
like
no.
that.
Yeah, it's like, no, you got to take the
meant
vaccine, bro. You have
no.
to.
That's that's yes, yeah. Everybody seems to have that hypocrisy. That's fascinating. I did not know that about India. I feel woefully ignorant. That's completely also exploded my idea of what fame is, because you've got a guy like Mr. Beast, and he has translated his videos into all these different languages, maybe including Hindi, but I can't remember. But there are a bunch of different languages. Sure. Yeah, there are a bunch of different languages. And so this guy is arguably the most famous guy in the world, or among the top 5. And yet if you're American and he's American, but your parents have likely never heard of him. And what does that mean as far as somebody's fame level? Well, I'm not sure. It's just unprecedented.
That's funny. I've thought about this a lot too, because Beast likes to say that Jimmy, I should say, his real name. Jimmy likes to say that the most viewed person in the world is most powerful. And I think that's actually a fundamental misunderstanding of power. And I think he's wrong. And that's actually a really fun way to think about the difference between fame and power. And also part of the reason why I want democratization of a lot of these institutions, because I understand the gateways that they hold on power. So for example, on Capitol Hill, if you were to ask all 435 members of Congress, and you were to be like, hey, do you know who, and just name any YouTuber. I'm not talking about myself. And I would guess 10% would know. If you were to ask them, do you know who Jake Tapper is? 95%, maybe 100% would know. So if a YouTuber gets 5 times the amount of views, even a political YouTuber, but every single one of them knows who Jake Tapper is and has a cell phone, who's more powerful in Washington, right? And so that's what I'm trying to get at, is that a single New York Times column is orders of magnitude more important and influential. And so part of the reason I want to destroy those institutions is because I understand that their proximity and influence on power has far more disproportionate impact on the 330 million Americans who don't even know that they're being ruled by Charles Murray and what he used to call the narrow elite. You know, people don't even understand these systems because they're anti-democratic. They're opaque by design, by nature. Nobody wants to tell you the truth. The only reason I can tell you any of that is because I used to work in the system. And up until 5 years ago, there was no way for me to make any money and to tell anybody this, right? I would be screwed. I had no incentive.
I'm starting to wonder if the closest thing that we've had to democracy in how you're characterizing it was actually Tom Friedman talking to his cab driver.
Oh, yeah, you're right. Absolutely.
He actually, whatever you think of him or mock him for, he's somebody powerful people read.
Yes.
They do.
Yes.
Obama cared about his columns quite a bit. I've been aware of other powerful people who have. And
Biden loves Tom Friedman. Loves him.
Biden loves Tom Friedman. So it's not a scientific survey-based reaction, but perhaps the cab driver is as close as you're going to get in that old system to democracy, because he's telling him something that he can tell the powerful people about.
What was the most influential call for Biden to drop out? It was not any Democratic leader. It was Ezra Klein saying Biden should drop out in the pages of the New York Times. That was it. That was the most influential call. I'm sure, Ethan, I'm sure you're annoyed by this too. In dissident circles, conventional wisdom from like 5 years ago will just be there. And then some random person on CNN will be like, well, maybe we should consider, 30% of X dissident wisdom. And everyone's like, oh my God, like such a good point. And you're like, what? Like we've all been saying that for years. Like,
and they'll forget about having been on the other side of that. Opinion.
Oh yeah. That didn't even happen. It doesn't matter because you and I don't matter at all. We're not a part of the ecosystem.
Well, I don't even know if it's that. I think it's some that has to do with human psychology, because Nate Silver clearly matters to a lot of these people. That's why they get so angry at him. So many of the people who've been screaming at him for months as he's been saying Biden should drop out have instantly switch to having always had that opinion, but they retain that resentment of Nate Silver, I've noticed. And
Absolutely.
that's just,
You're so right.
That's just how it goes. It's
That's just how it goes.
completely, I can't live that way. I don't understand. Maybe they're happier than I am. If I never remembered my previous opinion, I suppose I would be more sanguine, but
they're definitely happier than we are. That's for sure.